question that has been plaguing the intellectual discourse over the years have given us some of the most spectacularly stupid answers, and not just by people in one camp. It's been spread across the entire board. So to answer the question without any ambiguity and as clear and as concise as anyone ever could, was Nazi Germany capitalist or socialist? Yes. Okay, so the fake ending to this video was a joke, but the question and answer that preceded it was not. The debate between whether fascism, specifically the National Socialist German Workers' Party, was capitalist or socialist, or if fascism is a right-wing or left-wing ideology, has been plaguing YouTube for a while. And while lots of ignorant ideologues have been pointing out a handful of Nazi policies favored one side or another, and trying to paint this narrative that, well, it must be this other thing that I'm not, you guys better answer for it now, is not only wrong, but it's myopic, ignorant, and most likely intellectually dishonest. Not just with communists, but with everyone. Progressives, conservatives, communists, libertarians, you name it. Everyone likes to use this boogeyman to paint all of their political enemies as the bad guy. And most all of them are wrong. Now, before we talk about whether or not this was a socialist or a capitalist regime, or if it was right or left wing, we need to define what all of this means. And again, it's not convenient for anyone. Socialism and capitalism aren't strict terms that are very limited in their scopes of classifications. Anyone who says otherwise is an ignorant ideologue who doesn't know what they're talking about, or intellectually dishonest, or both. Socialism and capitalism are umbrella terms. They are classifications for a broad set of systems. Socialists range from social democracies all the way up to authoritarian Marxism, from anarchist communist all the way to the Juche idea, though the latter is becoming something else entirely, but that's a topic for another time. Nonetheless, capitalism doesn't mean a totally laissez-faire free market anarchy, and if it has even one government regulation, it's socialism. Sorry, it's just not. Keynes was a capitalist, not just Hayek. Think of the capitalism-socialism issue not as a pure dichotomy, but a sliding scale where various ideas or states can be placed on either side of the spectrum. Some are quote-unquote more capitalist than others. Some are quote-unquote more socialist than others. Some fit so well in the middle that putting them on either one side would be disingenuous, and calling it a mixed economy would be more apt. People who are on the extreme side like to go down this purity spiral. Well, sure, this country might have had the lowest regulations, tax burdens, and social welfare programs, but they had a food stamp program, therefore it's literally like the USSR, or vice versa. Well, sure, this state had ownership over the means of production and equity was enforced, but they did allow a McDonald's there. Surely this was a capitalist hellhole. Now, this is happening on a less extreme manner when it comes to dragging Hitler into this. Why? Because Hitler can be whatever you want him to be. Hitler had nationalized industries, and he also privatized them. He incorporated lots of socialist ideas into his rhetoric and his writing, and at the same time was a staunch critic of it. He also incorporated a lot of pro-market concepts into his writing and his rhetoric, but he was also a staunch critic of that as well. National Socialism, like all forms of fascism, is a completely economically incoherent ideology. What I mean by incoherent is not that I don't understand it, or I don't like it, or I think that it's stupid, but there is no coherent structure or underlying principle that unifies these ideas other than what the dictator said was a good idea this morning. On one hand, they're critical of capitalism and socialism, yet they incorporate aspects of both. This is what's known as third positionism. If capitalism is one position and socialism is another, then what would be the third? Combination of the two. The economic ideology of Nazi Germany can be boiled down to whatever Hitler felt best for the German people. If he felt one way one morning, well, that was the new economic prescription. If he felt like a totally different way was better tomorrow, well, that's the new economic prescription. Now, we can look at some of the things that the Nazi Party did that the left would generally like in theory, but would object to some of the specifics, like Volksgemeinschaft? Hold on.
Volksgemeinschaft.
Under the German system, Nazi Germany had many social welfare programs like free nurseries, supplemental nutrition programs, retirement programs, health insurance programs, long-term care facilities, and various disability programs. All kinds of fringe benefits. But I don't know too many progressives today that would say that if someone was mentally handicapped, we should just euthanize them because they're a drain on the economy like they did in Nazi Germany. Nor would they prefer that some races get more benefits than other races. Well, at least not admittedly so. Well, clearly it was a capitalist country, right? Well, not so fast. So the Nazis did allow for private industry, but it's not the kind of private industry that most people who would self-describe themselves as capitalist would support. They wouldn't support the state instructing private industry to produce certain amounts of certain goods for the state. They also wouldn't advocate the protectionist policies that keep competitors out of the market. They also would oppose corporations and the government being in bed with each other. They would also oppose all of the stringent regulations to put up barriers to entry. So unless you're a fascist yourself, chances are these are not how you would envision your ideal system, especially given the other factors that get pointed out as being the opposite of what you hold true. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it's important to nail this point hard. Hitler did not have a coherent economic plan, just an idea of being a third positionist, a third position between capitalism and socialism, and fascism has elements of both. Now there's the whole left-right wing thing. This one's pretty easy to hash out because these labels are pretty ambiguous. Unless you're addressing people who self-apply those labels, these are just arbitrary distinctions for most political thought, and they are mostly trivial distinctions, and they are just used to classify various schools of thought into large groups. But if you want a more objective designation of what they are, ask them, then ask their critics. If you find that most of the answers are the same, then you have a pretty clear indicator. If you ask critics of progressivism, they'll tell you that progressives are left-wing. If you ask progressives, chances are they too will say that they're left-wing. Same with conservatives, communists, democratic, socialists, the alt-right, etc. These things get a little bit murky when you start asking people like libertarians, considering that there's many different types, and critics of centrism tend to be all over the fucking map. With the exception of some American conservatives, both Nazis and their critics were in overwhelming agreement that they're right-wing. Now, does that mean that American conservatives are Nazis? No. Does that mean that right-leaning libertarians are Nazis? Maybe Cantwell, but no. We can say that progressives are on the left because progressives and their critics both claim that they're left-wing. Does that mean that they're the same thing as a Marxist? Are they the same thing as an anarcho-communist? Now, if you're a libertarian and you said yes to either one of these, then you should have no problem with me ascribing to you that you're both the C4SS style of libertarian and alt-right, because hey, it's all libertarianism. So we'll just wrap this up real nice. Nazis say they're right-wing. The vast majority of their critics concur. It's only a few ignorant people who try to pass it off as being left-wing, because they genuinely believe that if they're in the same wing, then that makes their ideology the same. But it doesn't, so who cares if they're on the right? You don't advocate what they do. Moving along. Well then, why is socialism in the name? Well, I would like to point out that people like D'Souza and PragerU try to tie Nazism with left-wing ideologies, and one of their main arguments is that the fact that it's called the Nationalist Socialist Party, offering that it's proof that they're socialists in the same way that most self-described socialists would call themselves socialists. Why? Because socialism is in the name of the party. However, in later videos they would also say that the Nationalist Socialists aren't nationalists even though it's in the name. So you can't have it both ways, guys. So why did they use the term socialist? Easy, to make it more palatable for people on the other side of the political aisle to be interested in changing their ideology. And the nationalist was to make it clear that they weren't unpalatable to the other side of the spectrum. Look at it this way, we can point out all day that socialism is in the name, but you would also have to acknowledge that nationalist was also in the name. It's right in front of you. And for you to explain it, you would have to also say it. He's forcing you to acknowledge that there is some compromise between these two factors of political commentary that were always seen as distinct from one another. If you're going to say that he's a socialist because socialism is in the name, then you can't ignore the fact that nationalism is also in the name. So, again, to answer the question without any ambiguity and as clear and as concise as anyone could ever be, was Nazi Germany capitalism or socialism? Yes. But here's the problem. When people are trying to pin socialism or capitalism to Hitler, it's to try to pigeonhole some kind of boogeyman on them. When people try to do this to you, you only need to respond with, "You're an idiot." Because what they're trying to say is that if their system was socialist, then all socialists are genocidal anti-Semites, and if their system is capitalist, then all capitalists are genocidal anti-Semites. They were this particular one, and so are you. So you need to explain to me why you want to gas the Jews. You only need to ignore these idiots and find someone else to have a debate with. They are not worth your time. They are not worth buying a mug from. When people bring up Hitler, they're not bringing him out because they had a very staunch opinions about his economic prescriptions. They're bringing him up because he slaughtered 12 million people, not counting all the deaths from the war. No one points out this comparison hoping that you would understand the economic situation that was happening in Nazi Germany at the time, because no one cares. They just want to pin a genocidal maniac to you so that they don't have to answer the harder questions like, does their economic prescriptions work? There's right-wing and left-wing states throughout time that have engaged in genocide. Now you can say that Stalin didn't kill any Jews, to which a Nazi would love to play that same historical revisionism game with you and say that neither did Hitler. I guess the too long didn't watch version of this is pretty simple. If you try to make videos saying that Hitler was a capitalist or a socialist and that he would have been a Democrat or a libertarian today, then you're an intellectually bankrupt and dishonest person. But you already knew that, you just needed to hear someone say it out loud. Anyways, I will talk to you guys later. Worms.